Welcome to the Zoom webinar on the Lighthouse study for children and adolescents with the 16p11.2 deletion. I'm Dr. Paul Wang. I'm trained as a developmental behavioral pediatrician. I've been working at the Simons Foundation for about 5 years under the direction of Dr. Wendy Chung, who's also online. I think you can probably see her, and whose name I think most of you probably already know. I'm going to turn it over to Wendy just for a short introduction, and just want to say in terms of housekeeping, this is a Zoom webinar, so that means that we don't see you and we don't hear you either, but we do want to invite your questions, your input through the Q&A feature of the Zoom. And if you look down at the bottom of the screen, move your cursor down there, you'll see Q&A somewhere down there. For me, it's sort of on the right-hand side. So please feel free to put anything that you want into the Q&A. Wendy?
Thanks, Dr. Wang. I'm really thrilled to see, well, not actually see, but at least to know you guys are out there. It's been a little while since we've connected, and just to let you know that we're all doing well, and I hope you are as well. I'm wearing two different hats today. I think many of you know me as the Simons Searchlight or Simons VIP Principal Investigator. Just to give you an update on that program, it's really expanded quite a bit since the last time we checked in. We have now over 4,000 families around the world, not just with 16p11.2, but several other genetic conditions as well. And so in a good way, we're learning from each other, and I think really advancing the science and hopefully to the point of treatments. And so as we're talking about that, let me say that the second hat I'm wearing, as Dr. Wang said, is really specifically for this Lighthouse clinical trial. Just to make it clear, this is separate from Simons Searchlight. So you don't have to be part of Lighthouse to be part of Simons Searchlight. And technically, you don't have to be part of Simons Searchlight to be in Lighthouse. But obviously, there's some overlap, and we want to invite everyone with the 16p11.2 deletion to think about whether or not they'd like to learn more about or be part of the Lighthouse arbaclofen trial. So we're giving you an update. I think the good news is although we had some sort of pauses in terms of launching the trial with COVID, we're really excited to say now's the time. And so we wanted to get back in touch with you and answer your questions. And I'm thrilled to have Dr. Wang here to do with that for us today. Dr. Wang?
Great. Thanks very much, Dr. Chung. I'm going to put up my slides here through share screen. And here we go. I'll put it into slideshow view. So hopefully you're all seeing the title slide, which just says the Lighthouse Study, a drug trial for 16p11.2 deletion. And you've seen and heard now Dr. Chung's name and my own. For a lot of you may have attended the webinar that we held back in September, when we were starting to get all the wheels, all the balls turning for this study. The slides that I'm showing today are almost are very, very similar to what we showed in September. I've actually just highlighted in bright blue. You'll see that in a handful of places where things have been updated. But largely, we're going to be covering the same ground, and then just talking about the fact that the study is now ready to launch, ready to start enrolling patients, families such as yourselves. So first, I'll give a background. Dr. Chung already talked a little bit about Safari and Searchlight. Just to extend on that a little, tell you about a subsidiary of Searchlight, which is called Clinical Research Associates, and that is the official organization that is really running the trial, CRA here. I'll tell you about some previous research that the Simons Foundation, Safari, and Searchlight have sponsored in individuals who have the 16p deletion, and then some research in mouse models of 16p, which have really led up to this study that we're talking about today. The drug that's being examined and tested in the study is called arbaclofen, so I'll tell you a bit about that. Then drill down and look closely at exactly the study and what it will look like, what it entails, what kind of visits, what kind of things the participants will be asked to do. We'll talk about the impact of COVID a little bit more, and then finally end on how to join the study. So Safari, and I know you all know Safari's name, has a mission to improve the diagnosis, the understanding, and treatment of autism spectrum disorders and related conditions. And Clinical Research Associates, CRA, is an affiliate, really a subsidiary of the Simons Foundation. And CRA actually holds the rights to arbaclofen. So CRA is the only organization that has arbaclofen available for testing in 16p or in other conditions. We'll cover a little bit about where else arbaclofen has been tested. So again, the mission is not just to understand and to diagnose autism and related genetic conditions, but also to advance the treatment. A lot of you probably know that through its SSC, through Searchlight, and through the SPARK projects and a lot of other research, Simons Foundation has done a lot to advance the diagnosis of what underlies autism and other neurodevelopmental disabilities, especially the genetic conditions that are underlying it. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you see a list of so-called CNVs, including the 16p deletion, and a number of the genes as well that have been associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders. So Simons Foundation has done a lot to help us understand those diagnoses and the fact that they are associated with neurodevelopmental disabilities. We've sponsored some research specifically in the 16p community, and thank you to all of you out there who have participated in that research so that we understand better exactly how the 16p11.2 deletion affects people in terms of their development. How do the development of children and adolescents with this genetic condition may differ from other people who don't have the genetic condition. We know, for example, that you don't have to get autism just because you have the 16p11.2 deletion. And in fact, a majority of people with the deletion do not have autism. In fact, this study that we're talking about today, the Lighthouse study, does not require anybody to have autism. What we've learned, again, through the participation of a lot of you who may be listening, is that speech and language impairments are very common, much more common than autism in the 16p11.2 deletion. And in fact, you can even see on brainwave tracings, and that's what is shown in the bottom right of this slide, that there are differences in the auditory processing and how the brain processes sounds in people who have the 16p deletion. So I won't get into the details of it, but this wave, this brain tracing that can be detected is larger, and you can see it's, and in fact is also a little bit delayed from the time that the sound is actually heard in the brains of people who have the 16p deletion. There's been some further research that Simons has sponsored and helped to organize, in fact, looking at the effects of the 16p11.2 deletion in mouse models, in animal models of the genetic condition. And what researchers determined, this is a paper from 2015, is that there's a receptor in the brain called the mGluR5 receptor. You find it on nerves, so people call it a neurotransmitter receptor, a nerve receptor, that seems to play a role, that seems to be doing something a little bit different in people with the deletion than in people who don't have it. And the researchers went on to ask themselves, well, how could we try to modulate the mGluR5 signaling, the activity of the mGluR5 receptor? And they knew from other research that had been going on that a drug called arbaclofen actually could do that. So the receptors acting a little bit differently in the 16p11.2 deletion, and arbaclofen might modulate it so it acts more like it does in the brain of people who don't have the deletion. They did a bunch of experiments, and what's really nice here is that it was actually not just one laboratory, but a group of 3 different laboratories who were all running the same experiment. And the nice thing that can happen in science is when laboratories replicate, then when they all have the same result, it's not like just one lab finds something, but other labs doing the experiment find a consistent result. They looked at memory in mice that had the equivalent of a 16p deletion. And they found that memory was not as good in those mice. Their learning and memory did seem to have an impairment. The way they tested it is kind of funny. First, they put the mouse in a little chamber that has 2 objects that are the same. Then they switch out one of the objects. So there's a new thing in there, and they just look at how much time the mouse spends checking out the new thing, realizing that it's new and that this is an interesting thing that they hadn't seen before. What they found is that in this blue bar, the mice with the 16p deletion didn't even seem to recognize that the new object was there. They were just sort of 50-50 here. You can see 0.5, 50-50 looking at the two objects the same amount. But then after giving them arbaclofen, so here with the plus, then the mice did seem to realize in the orange bar, oh yeah, there's something new there. So it seemed that their memory and their learning were working a little bit better with the arbaclofen. So that's great that we can help the learning and memory of mice who have a 16p deletion or the equivalent. But of course, people are not mice. People are very different. The human brain is much more complex than the mouse brain. And so we don't know for sure if something that works in mice to help learning and memory would work in people to help learning and memory. But the results in the mice are encouraging. And I'll show you a bit more about arbaclofen. And when you put together these encouraging results in the mice and what we understand to be the pretty safe profile of arbaclofen, that's really what got us to this study. That's what got us to thinking, okay, arbaclofen is a safe enough drug that we can test it, that we can try it in kids and adolescents with the 16p deletion to see if it might make a difference in their learning and memory. And then this second, this dashed line here, some of the other results in the mice that I haven't shown a slide on, is that also seem to help motor function in the mice. Again, mice don't have speech and language the way people do. Mice do have motor function like people have motor function, but of course it's not quite the same. And so we really don't know for sure from the mouse work whether something's going to work, but it seemed that it's reasonable to see if the results in the mouse will translate into benefits for people with the 16p11.2 deletion. So a word about the medication that is being tested in this study. It's called arbaclofen, and it has a bunch of different names. If you Google it, you'll find it referred to in these different ways at the top of the slide. It can either be spelled out ARB, or it can be just capital R-baclofen. In some old literature, it's called L-baclofen for complicated reasons. It's R versus S, but it's L versus D. And then sometimes there's this numerical, alphanumeric abbreviation, STX209. One of the reasons that the Food and Drug Administration, as well as ourselves, feel comfortable enough with the safety profile of arbaclofen is that it's closely related, really closely related, to a drug that is already FDA approved. And that's called racemic baclofen. Racemic baclofen is used to treat spasticity in kids with cerebral palsy. Actually, it's also used in adults who have multiple sclerosis and have spasticity or muscle tightness associated with that. And it's estimated that every year in the United States, there's more than 10,000 children who receive racemic baclofen because they have muscle tightness associated with cerebral palsy. Racemic baclofen is actually a 50-50 mixture of arbaclofen and S-baclofen. So in this study, we're testing arbaclofen, and S-baclofen is just the mirror image of arbaclofen. It's like your two hands, your right and left hands, they're awfully similar to each other, but we know they're not the same. They're mirror images, just like your two shoes are mirror images of each other. And then we have the chemical drawings of arbaclofen and S-baclofen here showing you that they're really just mirror images of each other. So if you take a 50-50 mixture of arbaclofen and S-baclofen, that is racemic baclofen, which is already being prescribed to children who have cerebral palsy. In this study, we're only using arbaclofen because actually the truth is, after chemists looked into it, it's the arbaclofen that's making the difference. It's the arbaclofen that's working on the nerve transmitters, on the nerve receptors like the mGluR5 one that we mentioned before. Specifically, it works first on what's called the GABA B receptor. And then because it acts on the GABA B receptor, it influences the action of mGluR and some other receptors as well. So arbaclofen has already been tested in kids with autism and also in another group, in children and adolescents, and actually adults too, with Fragile X syndrome, which is a different genetic condition. I'm just going to talk about the experience here, the results that were seen when arbaclofen was tested in autism here. So there's one study, and this is published, it's something you can find. It's published by the first author named Veenstra van der Weel, whose name is down here. It was a study running, which was run with 150 participants, children and adolescents, 6 to 21 years of age. The main assessment was on this scale that's called the ABC-SW/L. And here, unfortunately, it did not look like arbaclofen was doing anything different than placebo. It was not different than a sugar pill. Patients improved whether they got the sugar pill or arbaclofen. There's a lot of reasons why we think that happened. But if you looked on a secondary endpoint, another measurement which was also taken in the study, it looked like people on the arbaclofen, the dark line here, were getting better more than those on placebo. So their symptoms were going down more than the subjects who got placebo. So that's a hopeful sign. But drug trials are sort of like when you're playing pool. You have to call which pocket you're going to put the ball into. You have to say, the 9 ball in the corner pocket. If you get it into the middle pocket, that doesn't count as far as FDA is concerned. You have to call ahead of time. And the call that the sponsors of this trial made is they said, we're calling the ABC scale, not the CGI-S. And so officially for FDA reasons, that study was not positive, even though a lot of scientists agree that it looked like it was showing promise. It showed enough promise that there are actually 2 other academic groups. There are actually one in Canada and one in Europe. This first study was in the US. So these other groups thought there was enough promise that they wanted to run their own studies. So those studies are actually underway in autism, not in 16p, not in Fragile X. They are running their own studies in autism right now. They started before the pandemic. They were really, really slowed down by the pandemic. But those studies are going on right now in Canada and in Europe for autism. What are the side effects of arbaclofen? This table shows some of them. And in the columns here, you see first what the side effects of arbaclofen were in the autism study, and then what the side effects of placebo, the sugar pill, were in that same autism study. And you can see it is a little bit upsetting to the tummy. Even kids, of course, these are kids, they could have had a virus or some other reason that gave them a little bit of an upset tummy or ate something that didn't agree with them. And that's why even on the sugar pill, you'll see 10% of people having a little bit of nausea or even some vomiting. It is slightly higher on arbaclofen, slightly higher rate of headache, a little bit more emotional too, and more drowsiness on arbaclofen than on placebo. The rest of these side effects you'll see are basically equal on the sugar pill or on arbaclofen. So we don't think that arbaclofen is really causing a problem with any of these other side effects. We also know that racemic baclofen, the FDA approved drug, which is used for cerebral palsy, it definitely has side effects. It has some rate also in different studies, of course, so it's a little hard to compare. Somewhere around 5 to 10%, also with nausea and vomiting, headache, not so much. The drowsiness actually tends to be much greater with racemic baclofen. We don't know why the racemic baclofen seems to cause so much more of the drowsiness and sedation. We see some of it definitely with arbaclofen, but not quite as much as some studies have shown with racemic baclofen. So these are basically just some of the more common side effects that are seen with arbaclofen. The good news is that they all went away. None of them were permanent side effects. Sometimes they went away when the dose was reduced, and that's possible. You can reduce the dose during the early parts of the study at least. You can also, for people who really can't stand the side effects, you can stop the medication, and people who are in the study, if they have unacceptable side effects, they can withdraw at any time if they like to. But the good news is that none of these side effects were permanent. They did go away, and sometimes they went away even staying on the same dose. It's just something that people's bodies got used to and the side effects disappeared. So as we started thinking about this study for the 16p community, we involved the community. We involved probably a lot of you, sending out a survey asking what you thought a study should look like, what was doable for you, and what your top concerns were. We were really pleased that 207 families responded. We sent this survey out to people in North America and elsewhere in the world too. About 90% of the people who responded were in the US. And out of those respondents, 114 said, yeah, we would think about participating. And about 90% of them had children or adolescents with the 16p11.2 deletion, as opposed to even younger or older individuals with the deletion. We asked people, what about travel? Could you do a long trip? Could you do a short trip? And people generally said that the shorter trips were much easier to schedule into the rest of your busy lives than a longer trip. Even if multiple short trips were needed, that would be better than having to do, let's say, a 2-week trip to a study site. And people also told us what their top concerns were that 16p was associated with for their family member. And on top of the list were the speech and language. That really shouldn't have been a surprise to us. It wasn't, because we know that's such a common concern. And then the learning and the memory and the thinking. Those are the top things that people said. And number 3 were the motor challenges, motor difficulties, both fine motor and gross motor. So we took this into account as we were designing the study to make sure that we would look at all of these areas to see if our baclofen might make a difference. So here's an overview of the study, and excuse me, just clearing something on my screen here. The study is for both boys and girls who are between 5 and 17 years of age. So that means going up to 17 years, 11 months, and 30 days. We originally planned to run the study in 3 sites in the US, distributed, Northeast, Northwest, and down sort of South Central, I guess, Houston. But we're actually now working with a site in the New York City area. We don't have that finalized yet, but we're very hopeful that they'll come aboard to help run the study also. The study involves 16 weeks of treatment with our baclofen. And our baclofen is dosed 3 times a day. It's a flexible dose, which means we're not giving everybody the same dose. We know that in general, younger, smaller kids who don't weigh as much should be getting a lower dose than the bigger, older kids who weigh more. So it's a flexible dose. And whenever somebody gets up to a dose that, if it does give them side effects, they can back down to a lower dose. The other aspect of the study is that it is a placebo-controlled study. In other words, for the first part of the study, about half of the participants will get a sugar pill and not our baclofen. And the reason for that is to keep all of the study investigators, the study researchers honest, so that when they evaluate the kids, they don't imagine that somebody's getting better. It's very easy, and people have shown this in a lot of studies of autism and in studies of other conditions as well, whether it's seizures or diabetes or high blood pressure or even cancer. A lot of times, people actually do get better. Their diabetes gets better, their high blood pressure gets better when they're given a sugar pill. And that's for reasons we don't totally understand, but basically it's mind over matter. Sometimes we can think our way into getting at least a little better, or at least temporarily better. And so that's why it's important to have a placebo control. I'll talk a little bit later about the second part of the study where everybody who wants to can get our baclofen, nobody will be getting the sugar pill. But during this initial 16 weeks, there'll be 4 visits. For people who are coming from out of town to one of the sites, the screening and the so-called day 1 visit will be combined into one trip. And they should count on that taking about 3 days at the study site. Then they'll go home with the medication. They'll taper up on the dose. So everybody starts at a very low dose. They go up as long as the medication is well tolerated. And then they come in again about 5 weeks later, and that's just a safety check. Make sure everything is okay. Actually have a doctor lay there, put their stethoscope on the chest and make sure that everything is okay. Then they go home again with the medication till the end of the 16 weeks. And they come in then and they get all the evaluations that were done at baseline, they get done again at the end of the 16 weeks. There's some safety evaluations too. And then you go home and you taper off of the drug. So our baclofen, like a lot of drugs, should not be stopped cold turkey. you come down gradually on the dose. Come down gradually, it's usually over about 2 to 3 weeks or so. And then the fourth visit is right there after you're all done with the drug. In between, there are also a lot of phone calls. The site will be initiating those calls just to see how things are going at home and to answer any questions that the families have. After that 16 weeks, after that placebo-controlled period, where about half of the participants are getting the sugar pill, that's followed by what we call the open label study or open label extension, where all participants who want to continue into that can get arbaclofen and nobody would get the sugar pill. Who's eligible for the study? Sorry, repeating from the previous slide, it's both girls and boys are eligible in that age range. And this is for people who have the 16p11.2 deletion, breakpoint 4 to breakpoint 5, not other 16p deletions, not duplications, and no other genetic diagnoses. People should only come into the study if they have some kind of developmental concern that requires support and therapy. And that's because we are hoping that arbaclofen will help with those disabilities. If we know there are some people out there with 16p deletions, it's a small number, but there are some who are really very, very fortunate and don't seem to have a significant disability. In that case, you don't want to be in the study, because if there's nothing that we can even try to hope that arbaclofen will help with, then there's no need to come into the study. It's okay if people are on other medications, but you just have to be on stable doses of those other medications, up to 2 neurologic or psychiatric medications. There are certain medications, though, where people cannot enter the study as well. We're worried about interactions with arbaclofen, or just worried about whether arbaclofen could work if that other medication's already on board. We want to make sure that there are no major medical issues which could be a safety concern. For example, if someone has a seizure disorder, if someone has epilepsy that's not well controlled, then they should not enter the study. We don't know if arbaclofen has any effects on pregnancy, on the developing embryo or fetus. And for that reason, people who are pregnant will not be eligible to enter the study, and anyone who does enter the study and is sexually active must agree to use appropriate contraception. The study at this point is limited only to people who are English speaking, and unfortunately we are not able to open up to people who speak other primary languages at home, and that's just because the evaluations that we have at this point are only developed in the English language. Of course, the parent or the guardian has to consent to participation, and we want to know that the participant himself or herself also assents to be in the study. Ultimately, this is something that you'll go over with the people at the site that you choose to work with. It's not our decision at CRA. It's not Simon Searchlight's decision. You will actually be seen by a physician, by the whole team at that site. They will answer any questions that you have, and they will ask you detailed questions about your child, your adolescent's medical condition, to understand whether it's safe and appropriate for them to enter the study. Here's a diagram of what the study looks like, and I've sort of described it in words before. So there's this screening period up to 3 days where you're doing the baseline evaluations just to see what speech and language, what is like at baseline, what learning and memory and motor abilities are like at baseline. And then at that first visit, you begin treatment. In this first part of the study, half the people go on to arbaclofen, half the people go on to placebo. They come in at about that 5-week point, at V2, just to make sure everything is going okay. Then they go home for the rest of the 16-week period. There are a bunch of phone calls in between. And then at the end of the 16 weeks, they come in again and they get evaluated again for their learning, memory, motor, speech, and language to see if anything has changed. They go home and there are phone calls again while you're tapering off the drug, coming off, gradually reducing the dose. And then for people who want to end there, they can end with V4, the fourth visit, or that can be the start of the open label study where everybody goes on to arbaclofen who wants to stay in. So the open label extension, just a little more information. Participants who complete the placebo-controlled study may be eligible as long as everything seems to be going okay. They go into the open label extension. And the purpose of this is to look at the safety of arbaclofen over a longer time period. Because FDA wants to know, okay, you tested it for 16 weeks in the core study. What if somebody takes it longer? We just want to make sure there are no side effects that pop up later. We don't think so because we know with racemic baclofen, that is not the case, but it's the kind of data that FDA always wants to see. And of course, the open label is an opportunity for everybody to receive arbaclofen, regardless of whether they got the sugar pill or arbaclofen in the first part of the study. The open label extension is also 4 months, 16 weeks. We're still working out the details, how many visits, but it'll be fewer than in the first 16 weeks. It will still require, we believe, probably 2 additional visits distributed over that 4-month period. There will be at least 1 additional blood draw, and that's because FDA wants to see blood tests to make sure there are no side effects on, say, your blood count or something like that. But the cost of travel will be covered just as they are being covered in the placebo-controlled in the first 16 weeks of the study. Here's a bunch of the assessments that we are actually running in the study, both parts of the study, the original 16 weeks and then the open label also. So there are a bunch of assessments of speech and language because we have heard from the community that this is a major area of challenges that your kids face. We'll be doing audio recordings so that they can be very careful analyses of children's speech and their pronunciation and articulation, et cetera, that you can't do live. You have to work with a recording to do those careful analyses. We're doing a bunch of sort of neuropsychology or school psychology assessments as well, looking at memory and IQ, attention, inhibition, flexibility, to see if there are any benefits to taking the drug on those areas of function. We'll be looking at autism symptoms. Again, we know that not everybody has autism. You don't have to have autism to enter the study, but we'll be looking at how any symptoms that are related to autism change or don't change with the drug treatment. Then we have what people like to call biomarker assessments. So these are just very objective. It doesn't take their measurements of biology. One type of biomarker, EEG, probably a lot of you are familiar with, that's looking at brain waves, seeing how they change. That's not every site. Only some of the sites have the capability to do the EEG. But then we also have computer-based tasks to look at motor skills, both fine motor and gross motor, not just the judgment of an examiner, but a computer-based assessment to look at those skills. And then finally, looking at safety with at least 2 blood draws, that's in the first part of the study, physical exams, and then, of course, just listening very, very carefully to what you have to say when you're at the site and you're telling them about whether there are or are not any side effects. Here's where the study sites are: Northeast, Northwest, South Central. Dr. Sarah Jane Webb is a psychologist researcher out in Seattle who's very experienced with a lot of different genetic conditions and autism as well. Down in Houston, Dr. Robin Kochel is a clinical neuropsychologist. She has a lot of experience with the 16p community. Some of you, I suspect, know her from the early research projects of Simon's Searchlight, Simon's VIP. And then up in Boston, Lisa Prock is the pediatrician and Ellen Hansen is a psychologist working with her. Again, many of the families may know Dr. Hansen, who's a psychologist who worked on Searchlight and VIP early on. And then tentatively, we're bringing aboard the site in New York City as well. So a word on study costs. First of all, we know obviously that for the large majority of families, you don't live in Boston or Seattle or Houston or New York, you're going to need to travel we will be able to help with the arrangements and to pay for the entirety of the travel costs, including ground transportation, the airline, or train tickets. Somebody sent in an email question whether they could take Amtrak. Yes. You can also drive if you are in driving distance to one of the sites, and we will happily reimburse for the cost of driving. There's a standard rate that the government and most corporations use, and we'll use that per mile rate also to reimburse people for that. If you are taking airline or train, we'll cover your ground transportation in the city where you're traveling to, the hotel. Local families I mentioned here can also drive themselves, or we can also arrange to have an Uber or something like that if that works out better for you. I just want to pass on a tip from Dr. Hansen, who worked with a lot of the 16p families during Simon's Searchlight and VIP studies. She says, ask for a hotel with a pool, because the kids will love just cooling off and chilling off after a long, hard day working with the study personnel in the hotel pool. So ask for a hotel that has a pool. Meals will also be covered during your travel. And what we'll be doing is we'll be giving you a charge card. They actually have a brand name on it. It's called a CLIN card that you can use for meals and other incidental expenses. For this, we do have to ask you to keep receipts and submit those. And honestly, that's so that the company that is running this can tell the government that they got receipts, this is just reimbursement for you, and you should not be charged income tax for this benefit. And then sites, and each site can tell you the details on this, will also provide a compensation for your time and effort, because we realize this is a big ask of you to take the time off from work, to leave potentially your other kids and a spouse at home, and to travel to this distant city. And so there will be compensation in light of all of that, in light of all you're doing there. So what about COVID-19? Well, of course, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on this work, like it has on almost everything in the country. We originally were shooting for starting the study, believe it or not, in March of 2020, right when the pandemic hit. So we've been delayed since then, had all sorts of delays, even as the pandemic dampened down a little bit. You've all heard about supply chain issues, about hiring issues and stuff like that. Well, all of that did indeed affect the study, and that's why we're not getting started until now. There are safety considerations still at play, and a lot of these are simply the regulations that are in place at the study sites. They are hospital run clinics, like healthcare facilities that of course have their own rules about safety, about COVID related kinds of issues. And the other thing that we know is that things keep changing. We seem to be on a bit of a surge right now in COVID again. Hopefully that'll die down and sites will be able to loosen up their requirements. But right now, the sites do still have some masking and other requirements. A lot of the assessments will be done with masks, but some evaluations, we insisted, obviously the speech and language kinds of things you can imagine. We said these have to be done without masks. And that's one of the reasons why we're only starting now, because only now are all the sites saying, okay, you can at least do those things without masks. Some of the sites also require the families, the participants, to get COVID tested before they will be allowed in. And so again, this is something that the sites can describe in detail for you, but a lot of them will be asking you to arrive in town the day before so that you can actually have a COVID test that they run, and with the result that'll be ready in time for you to go in the next day. And because there's that risk, we just strongly suggest that even before you leave home, that you get COVID tested. A rapid test is fine, and you can use your CLIN card for that expense. Now that those rapid tests are easier to come by. So again, the COVID-related precautions are things that we expect will change over the course of the study, and the sites are in the best position to tell you exactly what the requirements are for their particular site. I just have a bullet under there reminding that we want to convey our opinion, our perspective, that vaccines really do help to protect us all. We know that COVID has a large impact on a lot of you. Simon's Foundation, Safari actually sponsored research looking at how COVID has affected families with autism, families with genetic diagnoses. We know that it has, of course, obviously an effect on health, has had an effect on the finances of a lot of family. Schooling was terribly disrupted. I think now almost everybody is back to quote unquote normal schooling situation. But we want children to be in a stable schooling situation so that we know that any change in their learning and memory and their speech and language is the result of what's happening in the study and not the result of things that are like going haywire at school or new supports that are being added at school because they were suspended during COVID or something like that. So the sites will ask you just to make sure that your kids are in a stable in-person schooling situation and that your other therapies that you might be getting at home also are in a stable situation. Given the impacts on families through health and finances and everything, and given the large demands of the study, we want to just ask everybody, of course, think carefully about your own circumstances, whether you're in a good position to enroll in the study at this point, because it'll be a large effort for you. It's multiple visits, big travel, leaving, potentially other people in your family behind. We want to make sure that kids are in a stable situation so that we can see if the medication is helping them in any way. The study is not going to be over in a flash, so you don't all have to enroll right at the beginning of the study. And that's why we just want to ask you to make sure you're in a good position as a family when you're ready to enroll. So next steps, and this is my last slide. The study is ready to enroll. We're recruiting now. And I'm going to leave this slide up so that you can copy down these long email addresses for the contact person at each site in Boston, in Houston, and Seattle. And then New York, as I said, we don't have everything finalized yet, but we're very hopeful. They're very hopeful. And so they're happy to take your inquiries in the New York site as well. We'll be sending out an email as well with all of these email addresses so that if you don't get a chance to write them down, we'll be sending them out. This is my email address, and we're happy to take questions as well. And then I want to let you know that we have a study website. It was supposed to be ready today. I'm really sorry to say it. I just checked and it's not up and running. Hopefully Monday, you can go to it at either of these two addresses, lighthouse.com, where the I and the G are actually a 16, very clever, we thought, or Lighthouse spelled out like a real word, lighthouse16p.com. Those study websites, we really hope will be up and running on Monday or Tuesday, and they will have the contact information that's on this slide, and they will have other information about the study, most of which we've covered in the slides today, but there might be some other information there that you would find helpful. Again, my email address is up there as well, and we're happy to take questions at that email. So that's all I had for slides. I do want to go over a couple of questions that we received by email before today. And so I'm going to stop sharing, I think. I'll put it back up in a moment. Let's see. I think I have to turn off my pointer.
Paul, in the Google Doc, there are several questions that have come in today and from before. I can either read them out to you or you can pull them up.
Oh, that's great. I was going to go to it myself, but if you could read them, that'd be great. Okay, and then I can leave this slide up also.
Yep, very good. So there are a bunch of different questions. I'm going to start with the ones from today because they're they're good questions. They're important. Assuming that the study is successful and at the conclusion of the study, how long then, if someone could use the medication outside of the study is kind of the gist of the question. So what happens after the study?
Yeah, so the study has the two parts again. It has the placebo-controlled initial 16 weeks and then the open label extension, which is another 16 weeks. At the end of that, we will not be able to offer the drug again until it gets approved, unless, we'll look at the data and if things look really, really promising, then we will be able to consider whether we can open up another open label extension study to allow people to get the drug between that time and when it actually like gets on the market, because going through FDA is a long process. Even if you send them positive study results, they can take a minimum of 9 months really before they will actually approve anything. So we know that there's that gap in there. And so if the study results look good, I've Dr. Chung and I have discussed this before, and I think that she's very supportive of this, then if things look good, then we would definitely do our best to try to offer it again in further open label use.
Yeah, I agree with that. So if this is successful, is this the type of drug that has to be taken lifelong then? How does that work in terms of its effect?
Yeah, the answer to that is we really don't know. At this point, we're testing it for the 16-week period, obviously, and then people will also continue on for another 16 weeks. So some people will be on it for more than half the year, 32 weeks, let's say, and we'll be able to see how people do on that. Honestly, at that point, we'll have to take stock and we'll hear from you. We'll hear from members of the community what happens when people come off the drug. And of course, that's built into part of the study. We see your kids again after they taper off drug. And so we will be seeing at that point what happens when people come off of it. So really, it's something that time will tell. The data will show us.
So this is kind of a study design question. Is 16 weeks enough to be able to see meaningful effects?
That is such a key question. And it's something that we wrestled with, thought about going shorter, and we thought, no, 8 weeks, probably not enough. 12 weeks, let's go a little bit longer, let's go to 16 weeks. And then there are just the practicalities of going longer. People, when drug companies try to run longer studies, unfortunately, things come up. People's lives are complicated, especially when we're asking them to travel such a great distance. We are very hopeful that 16 weeks is going to be enough to see some kind of effect. And that's how we settled on this duration for the study.
Does the drug cause addiction?
It does not, no. So we know that a couple of ways. One is that racemic baclofen, which is the really closely related drug that's been on the market. Actually, I didn't even say this. It's been on the market for more than 30 years. It is not addictive. The other thing that we know is that arbaclofen by itself has been tested in animal research to see if it's addictive to them, and it's not. So we have no reason to think it's addictive.
So these are some logistics. So you mentioned the dosing being 3 times a day. So you've got school in the middle of the day. How does that work? Can you time it so that you could do it sort of before school, after school, in the evening, but that might not be exactly sort of evenly throughout the day? How does that work?
Right. So it doesn't have to be exactly even through the day. It doesn't have to be every 8 hours. And what people have done in the previous studies in autism and in Fragile X syndrome is exactly what I think people were describing there. Once before school, and then right after school, and then in the late evening.
Okay, so these are again some logistical questions. So what about weekends? Parents might be working. Could they do, when you're at a one-day study visit, could those occur on the weekend?
That's up to each individual site. One of the sites at least told us that yes, they can consider scheduling on a Saturday. But I mean, there's no question. Obviously, with a 3-day visit, everybody's going to have to take off at least one weekday, and that first visit we do anticipate will be 3 days. And so yes, unfortunately, that's part of the burden that we know we're asking of all of you, that you're going to need to take off at least some work days.
Okay, and then this is again about, in this case, 2 parents. So, sometimes, we talked about paying for the transportation of 1 parent and a child, but maybe sometimes 2 parents are necessary. What happens in those cases?
Yeah, I think that's something that we can discuss on a case-by-case basis. In the vast majority of cases, we believe that it should be plenty to have 1 parent there. And of course, some of you have other kids, and so 1 parent will want to be staying at home. We think that in the vast majority of cases, we should be able to handle this. We hope you'll be able to handle it with 1 parent, but let us know if you really feel that both parents need to travel. And you can discuss that with the site and with us also.
So, a couple questions about some children who might be developmentally delayed, and is there an inclusion or exclusion criteria depending on level of ability?
No, there is not. So it's really just the age, 5 through 17 years of age, with or without autism. And we understand that there is a range of developmental disabilities associated with 16p11.2 deletion. And there's no restrictions on that as far as coming into the study.
And, everyone can have an off day, especially when you think about disruption with travel or other things. What happens if someone has an off day at one of their study visits? Do they get dropped from the study or do they do a do-over? What happens?
They do not get dropped from the study, that's for sure. Um, that the recognizing that people have off days, recognizing that it can be challenging to work with some kids with 16p deletion. That's why we only have the study sites that we do. We went to sites that are experienced with 16p deletion, experienced with genetic conditions, with neurodevelopmental disorders in general. We recruited them because we know they're good at working with your kids. So they're very good sites, and we have confidence in them, in how they will work with your kids and drawing out the best from your kids. Having said that, that's another reason that we encourage families to, like travel the day before. And I think in almost every case, people will have to, and possibly some of that is for the COVID testing also, but get there early, get there the day before, settle down in your hotel room, relax, take a dip in the pool, get a good meal, get a good night's sleep, hopefully. I know that can be hard away from home sometimes, but we want you, of course, we want your kids at their best, at the best that's possible. And so travel early, try to rest up, and then we know you'll be working with great people at the sites.
Just one specific question. Does this do anything for obesity or low oxygen levels?
No, not that we know of. Does not affect those issues.
Okay. So I'm seeing some things that I'll just call logistical issues, and I'm wondering, Dr. Wang, maybe it would be helpful to have even a table or something. So here's some of the questions coming in. When will sites start recruiting? There's some people that might have more time over the summer, people who are teachers or might have something specific to the summer. Might be that there's some sites that have weekend sites. There's some that might be in terms of location, but I can just feel some of the families trying to decide kind of what's the best fit for my family in terms of sites. Do you want to answer any questions in general about either should they first just, sort of team up with the one that's logistically closest to them or easy enough to travel to, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, no question. There are a lot of considerations. It's a complicated issue trying to figure out how you're going to do this, when you're going to do this. We do appreciate that. I do think, and it's related to the previous question about hoping that you're hoping to avoid off days. Going to the closest site is probably going to be the best bet, just because travel is tough. Going to an unfamiliar place, so travel is tough. Going to the closest site is probably the best bet. The sites are Boston, Houston, and Seattle are all ready to start talking with families and figuring out a schedule. New York's not quite there yet, but they're willing to talk with families and just tell you like what would be involved if you're coming to New York. But the other three sites are ready to start thinking about when people can come in. So I invite you to contact them. Hopefully you are still seeing the emails up there. So you can contact them and figure out what's a good time for you and for them. Again, the studies, it's not like everybody has to be enrolled this summer. We're not going to be able to get all of you in this summer, quite frankly. So I think in general, summer can be a really good time for a lot of families. So we'd love to see that. We encourage you to do that. But for sure, the sites will be enrolling well into the fall, no doubt. And I would guess into 2023 even.
So just a quick point, there's a question of if there are any opportunities in Europe. We don't have any sites in Europe. Dr. Wang, would someone be eligible to come from Europe to participate?
Obviously, there's a huge logistical challenge there. And I want to mention that we also got an email with a question about Canada. Canada, of course, a little bit easier than Europe. You can drive here from Canada. So the answer is that in principle, we're fine with that. We have no issue with somebody who is English speaking, and I do have to mention that, coming from Europe for the study, and from Canada. The biggest issue is with the border controls, with what the border policies are for your country. Will they allow you to take an experimental, unapproved medication across the border back to your home? I don't know the answer to that. And so really that's the biggest question.
Just a couple other questions. Again, this is about logistics. Do you have any sense of how much time parents would have to know in advance when their study visits will be? There are logistical issues, getting time off of work and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And here I think the best course of action is to plan it all out at the beginning. Because we know when the study visits are supposed to be. There's day 1, and then there's a 5-week visit, then there's a 16-week visit, and then 4 weeks, I think it's 4 weeks after that. So no question, the best thing is to try to plan it all out at the beginning.
Okay. And do you anticipate there are any ages of young people that might be better or worse for this? Do you have any sense?
No. There was a study conducted in autism that I mentioned before, and there were also a couple of studies conducted in another genetic condition, Fragile X syndrome. And there did not seem to be any trend. There was nothing in the data that told us that, like 5 to 8-year-olds definitely do better than 13 to 16-year-olds or anything like that. We did think that the kids and adolescents in general did better than the young adults. The Fragile X study that was run previously did include young adults. And that's really the main reason that this study is being limited to kids and adolescents, because we do think that the adults didn't show as much benefit.
Yep. So these are a couple questions sort of tangentially related. Maybe I'll handle them. So there are questions about, have there been other trials for other drugs before, like Ritalin, or are there other medications or supplements that might be useful? So just as someone who knows 16p, there haven't been other clinical trials heretofore with either Ritalin or any other medications, any other behavioral medications. In general, we have seen people use different medications in the same way that other people that have attention issues do, or any sort of anxiety or depression or things like that. And I'd say some of those can be quite effective, but there's no universal recommendation. There's no specific vitamin or supplement that I would say everyone should be taking X, or any specific medication based on seizures that everyone should be taking Y. Definitely talk with your doctors, your own individual neurologist, psychologist in terms of issues. There's, in a good way, I would say, nothing that's been extremely bad, where people have had a very adverse reaction or problems that's 16p specific. And for some of those questions, feel free to contact us at Simon Searchlight. You can just, when you go to the About Us in the upper right of the website, you can send a question to the study team and we'll try and help you navigate some of those issues. So I think those are the main issues. Just to emphasize again what Dr. Wang had mentioned, we really are going to try and work with families. We know that it's just with COVID, especially, and other things, a lot going on, and things that are more stressful or logistically more difficult. So we are going to work very hard with the families to try and make everything work. We definitely will try and cover to make sure all of your expenses are paid in terms of being able to participate in the study. And as Dr. Wang said, we can be pretty generous in terms of making sure that the person in your family is able to perform at their best for the study visits and come in comfortably, and whatever they need to do to be able to fully participate. So the more you can think of those things in advance, the more that we can help you to make that a successful study visit and study opportunity. As we learn how we're doing this, we certainly will take those learnings back. So the first in, I give you guys lots of extra special thanks, because you're going to help us to do this even better for the 5th or 10th person in as we go through. And as a community, we certainly want to help each other as we go through this process. I'm hopeful, as Dr. Wang is, that we'll have sites essentially ready now to start taking your phone calls and be able to start thinking through dates and how to plan things out, and at least 3 sites that are available. And as Dr. Wang said, hopefully a 4th as well. So Dr. Wang, I think those are the main questions we got both today as well as in the past. A few little stragglers, but very specific things that we can get back to people online about. Maybe some very specific things, but again, any form of transportation that works out well for you, I think we can handle. And if you try one thing on your first visit and you decide that wasn't the best experience and want to pivot and do something else, you can certainly do that. That's perfectly fine.
Well, thank you all very much for joining this webinar. Thanks very much for your interest in this study. Please let us know if you have any questions. We will do our best to make this work for the 16p community.
Thanks, everyone. And we'll be posting the recording. So if you didn't get everything, or if another family member wants to watch, you'll be able to watch later as well. Have a good weekend.
Right. Thank you.